This is Rumble, and I'm Michael Moore. Thank you so much for tuning in here today. I have a special guest with me. Yesterday, we're recording this on Tuesday, May 5th. So yesterday, on May 4th, was the 50th anniversary of the massacre, the murder of the 4 students at Kent State in Ohio. A total of 13 students were shot on that day, May 4th, 1970. There had been approximately 4 days of protests against the Vietnam War that had been taking place on campus. And the governor of Ohio had ordered in the National Guard. And then the National Guard, once the sort of protests had kind of somewhat dissipated after a few days, the National Guard was still there. And so then the protests turned toward why is the National Guard on the campus and they should leave. This was 50 years ago this week that this happened, and I was 16 years old, and I remember the exact moment that I learned of this shooting by the National Guard in Kent, Ohio. I'm in near Flint, Michigan at this point in high school. I'm a sophomore in high school. And if I remember correctly, it was somewhere either in the noon hour, right after the noon hour. I was in government class, Mr. Trepus's government class. And someone came in and said that a bunch of students had been shot down in Kent, Ohio. And so our teacher turned on, I can't remember now, it was either the radio or we had something called National Educational Television, which they beamed into schools. It later became what we now know as PBS. But WNET from New York, that's what NET stands for, National Educational Television. This was in schools all across the country. And so they turned the TV on, and I was, I don't know. All I could think about during high school was how I was going to be sent to this war. And I was in a total state of panic and anxiety and fear during my teenage years in high school. How was I going to get out of this? I'm not going to go kill Vietnamese. What'd they do to me? What'd they do to us as Americans? What the hell was this about? And but I was paralyzed in that moment when this was announced. And I got out my my notebook, one of those composition books. And at that point in the Vietnam War, there had been approximately, I'm going to say, probably 50,000 dead. Eventually, there were 58,000 Americans killed in Vietnam, 2 million Vietnamese, at least, and probably another 2 million in Southeast Asia, mostly in Laos and Cambodia. This is what we did to these people. I stopped paying attention to the TV in the classroom. I didn't listen to the teacher, and I just started making small crosses, rows and rows of crosses in this composition book. One cross, and then another cross, and then another cross, and then another cross, and line after line. Occasionally, I would try to draw a Star of David, and then another cross, and then another cross, and then another cross. And then that went on and then finally the teacher noticed after, I don't know, probably 15, 20 minutes had gone by, and I must have looked like I was in some catatonic state. And he said to me, what are you doing? I said, I'm going to draw a cross for every one of the 50,000 dead that have died, Americans that have died in Vietnam. And I'm not going to stop until I get to 50,000. And I knew right then I was going to be sent to the principal's office, but he didn't do that. He said, you just keep doing that. Just keep doing it. And I did it for the rest of the hour. And I did it the next hour, and I did it the next hour, and then I did it the next day. And I kept going that week until I had 50,000 crosses in that composition book. I'm telling you all this because this was for me a seminal moment in my upbringing, in my childhood, as a 16-year-old, as one who thought he would probably be going to Vietnam in 2 years when I turned 18. And the sight of our American soldiers, the National Guard in Ohio, turning their guns and I'll put up a link so you can see the footage of this. Not one of these students were armed. The students not one of them were armed. You see early on some kid throwing a stone at some of the soldiers. You see a kid waving a black flag, another kid giving them the finger. That's it. No weapons, no arms. The soldiers go up to the top of this small hill, and then they turn, almost on orders, it looked like, and open fire. And they fired 60 to 70 shots, shot 13 of the students, 4 of them shot dead, another 9 wounded, one of them paralyzed for life. And this rocked me in such a profound way. And then seeing it on the news that night, this is back when the news actually showed you the violence that our government perpetrated, either on Vietnamese or on our own people. I'm sorry that the news media stopped showing the American public the ugly and awful truth of who we are. But a week later, Life magazine appeared on the doorstep, and there was a picture of one of the students laying dead in a pool of blood, and a 14-year-old girl kneeling over him, crying, screaming for help, for whatever. The 4 students killed that day were that young man in that Pulitzer Prize winning photo on the cover of Life. His name was Jeffrey Miller. Another young man by the name of William Schroeder. The supreme irony there was that William Schroeder was an ROTC student. ROTC as in the Army. In other words, the Army had shot and killed one of their own. Third student was Sandra Schuler, and the 4th student was Allison Krause. Allison and Jeffrey were there protesting the war in Vietnam. William and Sandra, according to the way that it was written up at the time, were just walking on their way to class. They were not involved. And one of the profound lessons I remember thinking about and writing about in my book of Crosses and Stars of David was that that whether you're a participant or whether you decide to be a bystander, no one is safe when the government is corrupt and evil. And I'm very honored to have here today on this podcast, on the day after the 50th anniversary of this slaughter at Kent State, the sister of Allison Krause, Laurel Krause. And Laurel has led a movement over the years, and we're going to talk about that. But a movement to get the truth out about what really happened that day, and has forced the issue to the forefront for decades now, so that people will not forget what happened. I haven't forgotten. And Laurel, I'm really honored to have you here with me today on my podcast.
Thank you for having me, Michael.
Are you okay today? I mean, it's just 24 hours after the 50th anniversary of losing your sister. So I really appreciate you doing this. And I told you we didn't have to do it today. We could do it another day. But
no, I wanted to do this. I'm certainly exhausted, but also exhilarated. We had a really healing and beautiful 50th. And it was just very unique with the COVID shelter in place element to it.
What did you do?
We held the Kent State 50th teach-in. When we learned from Kent State University that they weren't going to be honoring Allison or allowing us to participate just 2 weeks ago, we decided that we wanted to interview academics and scholars and even protesters. And I'm also one of the participants, along with Joseph Lewis, and find out what it means to them, the Kent State massacre then and now, what it means to the individual and the collective. And these are people who have been immersed in it. I would actually love to have some kids, too, come in. So we have a broad band. But basically, we got 8 people to participate. And I can tell you who if you're interested. But
Sure.
We got Peter Kuznick from The Untold History of the United States, Oliver Stone, and David Zeiger, who did the film Sir, No, Sir, which is about the GI protest during the Vietnam War. Right. Ira Stone and DeRay McKesson. And it's interesting that he came because he's from Ferguson and Black Lives Matter, because we feel that the Kent State massacre and Jackson State massacre that happened in May 1970 is about protest rights. And the right to protest without getting killed is a big one. And that's part of our concern, too, along with truth and accountability. We have David Swanson and then me. And it was just pulled together. But they're short Zoom interviews with people just answering 3 questions. But it's conversations never had before. It's always been, okay, well, then this happened, and then this happened, and it's, it's who knows what and whatever. But this is about the meaning and the 50 years later. These are the kind of conversations we feel need to be discussed.
Well, what were so this is a virtual teach-in that you posted and held yesterday, and I believe you're going to give me the link to that so that on our podcast page here, anybody listening to this after the podcast, you can go and click on the link if you'd like to observe and participate virtually in this teach-in that took place yesterday.
We were doing it in homage to the teach-ins of the old days. Never before. I mean, we're not allowed to think about these things related to government actions when they kill us. We're just supposed to put the blinders on and move forward. And what it means is there's no healing. Yeah. And so they have a country of people that have big gaping wounds that have been inflicted on them, and it makes them a lot less powerful. Yeah, I have a lot of hope here. I mean, what happened is this came together and people watched and they did it on the 4th, and you can do it now. You can watch it. It's 2 YouTubes, each of them 2 hours. So it's 4 hours, 3 or 4 hours. And it's basically raw footage, just let's listen to others talk about how they've come to terms with Kent State. How have they made peace with Kent State?
Can teenagers watch this? Is it good for them?
Oh, well, yes, because actually Joseph Lewis, who was shot twice in the melee at Kent State in the Kent State massacre, he details his experience as a young person. And everyone can relate to it.
He was a teenager at the time.
He was, I believe, 19 years old, right, like my sister, and he was a friend of my sister's. And he actually got shot by 2 different National Guardsmen, and it had 2 different. I mean, that's absurd. That. He tells a great story about that, so I won't share. People need to go to www.truthtribunal.org, and on our front page you'll learn about it. You'll see we have really beautiful art for this, and it's the Milton Glaser posters that Bob Dylan did back in the 60s. that Milton Glaser did of Bob Dylan. I don't know where he has a rainbow hair. Well, we took that because we just thought it was so cool, and we gave it to the Kent State 4. And you go to www.truthtribunal.org or www.Project Censored, and you can watch the teaching. And you can actually, just skip what you don't want to hear. And we hope that people will get a greater understanding what happened on May 4, 1970, 50 years ago. And it's a fact.
Why don't you walk us through exactly what happened that day? Because, of course, my view of it was as a sophomore in high school, sitting at Davison High School in Michigan. And was she your only sibling? Are there other brothers or sisters in the family?
Allison was my only sibling. She was my older sister by 4 years. She was 19. I'll tell you a little bit about Allison because I think she really is the star here as far as I'm concerned. She's my true north still. But she was an honor student at Kent State. Very curious, thoughtful, and peaceful woman. Although she believed in protest, and she was against the Vietnam War very, very strongly. And there were some of the reasons she was, against it is because all her friends were getting drafted. There's a draft lottery, and the draft lottery was taking people away based on their birthday, what kind of number you got. And right. All of her friends, had to make serious life decisions. And people that were 18, 19, and 20, they couldn't even vote.
Right.
The voting age was 21. And that really fueled a lot of energy, not happy energy. And I think that was one of the driving forces of the protest, that you're going to send me to war, but I can't vote.
Right.
Just didn't sit well with our generation. And
so where did the two of you grow up?
Well, we grew up in Cleveland and Pittsburgh, but Allison graduated high school in Wheaton, Maryland at John F. Kennedy High School. And that's where she really found her voice and, came of age-ish. She only lived to 19, so never really fully blossomed. But it was a very progressive high school back then. There was no dress code. I don't know if you remember that.
Yes, I lived through it. I remember getting the paddle a number of times because even in a public school, the dress code was very strict. You couldn't have your shirt tail out. You couldn't wear jeans.
Couldn't wear jeans.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, at this school, you could wear flannel shirts, and some of the teachers did too. And they had like different grades in different classes. And if you didn't want to go to class and instead you wanted to go to the art department, you could. And so it was a real free campus. And she
suburban DC, Wheaton.
Yes, it was in Wheaton, Maryland, right in Silver Spring area.
Yeah, Silver Spring, Tacoma Park.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And so we were going to school with ambassadors' kids and CIA operatives. Basically it's all in the government mix. And so people were a little bit more awakened to what was going on politically in the world.
Right.
And the kids were too. And so Allison was very much. And in this really fabulous fostered environment, she got into art, and she volunteered at St. Elizabeth's Hospital and had some breakthrough experiences with some young men that were mentally disabled and hadn't spoken for years. And they spoke with her because she had this very special, vivacious, attractive, well-connected energy that everyone wanted to be near. Mm-hmm. A little otherworldly, just very evolved. And so here I was,
the kid sister,
and I was 4 years behind.
Yeah.
And she was real smart. She didn't have to study or anything, and she always had a book in her hand, like I said. And so I was dyslexic and kind of the antithesis,
right.
And. But I tried, and I did my darndest, and she was also trying to get rid of me all the time because that's what an older sister does.
Right.
And, she had her birthday, her last birthday, when she turned 19, April 23rd, 1970.
April 23rd is my birthday.
It is?
Yeah. I've known this actually for many years because that thing pops up on Google, like who was born on your day, your birthday. And every year I read Allison's name, Allison Krause and William Shakespeare.
I never knew that. I mean, it's like, and I see mine. I'm March 22nd, and I think I have Jean-Paul Sartre, which is pretty good, but
that's pretty good. But I'll see you one William Shakespeare and one Allison Krause.
Yeah, I think you got me beat there for sure. Well, anyhow, for her birthday that year, I managed to finagle getting a train ride from Pittsburgh because our family had moved back to Pittsburgh. And so I got a train ride to Pittsburgh to Kent, Ohio, which was probably about a 2.5 hour train ride. And it was the first time I ever did that. And I remember my parents like, oh, will you ever come back? And I get on the train and my sister greeted me, at the train tracks in Kent, Ohio. It was the first time we were ever, together as, kids without our parents around. And it was fun. And it was really great times. And we went to see Woodstock, the movie, together.
Yeah, that had happened the previous summer, Woodstock.
And Woodstock was in August 1969. And, it's my feeling now that, it's 60, it's 50 years later, 51 for that. The government took a look at Woodstock and they said, we have to do something.
Right.
We have to stop this love, peace, and, whatever.
Right. No, there are historians who have said this and studied this, that gathering of that many young people totally freaked out certain people in power, including Richard Nixon.
Yes. Most specifically.
Yes.
We have to stop them.
Right.
We have
to stop them.
And then 9 months later, the perfect pregnancy, Kent State and Jackson State.
Yeah,
and they made sure that they had full coverage with black and white students so that they would have
Jackson State to people just so they know that a few days after
right. I can give you the nail, the whatever it is, the
thumbnail of it.
Thumbnail, thanks. I'm a little loopy because of all this, and so hope your listeners will understand it. I've been talking way too much, but Jackson State happened 11 days, 10 hours, and 10 days and like 30 hours or something like that after Kent State. It was done by, I think, the Highway Patrol. It was the students were protesting Kent State. They were protesting the Vietnam War, but it wasn't really a full-on protest. I've recently seen some stuff and learned that they were called out to protest by other forces that have remained anonymous. And the black students weren't as eager to go out and protest as the white students were, because they know that if they go out and there's guns at the protest, they're going to get shot.
Right.
Whereas the white students didn't have that experience.
Right.
So they did this in the middle of the night. It was at a female dormitory on the Jackson State campus. And you could see the bullet holes all over the front of the dormitory. They were shooting into a female dormitory. I don't understand any of this. To William Gibbs and the other fellow, I'm sorry, I don't know his name. Were killed. And I think like 11 or so were wounded. They never had a full number, because it has never mattered as much that it happened to black students as it has to white students,
sure.
which has always been a pain for our family because we don't have that view.
Right.
Any student, any protester killed by the government is illegal.
Right. Right. I should point out that in the days after the massacre at Kent State, students on campuses all across the country shut the campuses down, went on strike. Huge demonstrations that went on for days and days, right up into and including Jackson State there 11 days later. And so things were very tense, I think, all over the country.
Well, what started it all was when Richard Nixon gave his speech on TV. And as you alluded to already, back then, everything was on TV and everyone was glued to the TV. Like if the president was going to be speaking because your life was on the line, about the Vietnam War and its expansion or whatever, you were going to be watching because it mattered. It mattered. You might die. It was mortality issues, and you're a young person. You don't want to die for something that has no meaning.
Right.
So, he decided to have this Cambodian, and it was Cambodian invasion. It was such a betrayal because when he was running for office, he was running on his secret plan to end the war.
Yeah, he said he'd have us out of there in 6 months. This is 1968. He said this.
Right, and he was winding down. Actually, the numbers were winding down, and then the beginning of the year in January 1970, things started turning. And there was a lot of news out that the bombings were going on in Cambodia and Laos, and they weren't being reported by mainstream media. And that was going on for a long time before they copped to it. The first time they copped to it was when President Nixon got on that speech, and he said, we're going to go and invade Cambodia because this is just too dangerous. And he had this map and a pointer, and you saw that. What was your experience, Michael?
Well, this occurred, this invasion of Cambodia. Was it April 30th? Is that?
Yes.
Makes sense. Ironically, that became the day in 1975 that the Vietnamese defeated the United States and the Vietnam War ended on April 30th, 1975. But April 30th, 1970, Nixon holds a primetime press conference with the maps and the pointer in his hand, showing the two countries to the west that border Vietnam. That would be Laos to the north and Cambodia to the south. And said that we had to go in and invade Cambodia because the North Vietnamese were ducking out of North Vietnam and going into Laos and Cambodia and then coming back in the south. And that's how they were getting in through what was called the Ho Chi Minh Trail. This was not some kind of superhighway or whatever. It was just a name for actually quite an amazing infrastructure on the part of the Vietnamese to try and fight these American invaders. I mean,
it was guerrilla warfare.
It was guerrilla warfare, and I always tell people this who weren't alive then that Vietnam defeated the United States. The Vietnamese did not have a single aircraft carrier. The Viet Cong did not have a single fighter jet. They didn't have anything. All the things that we had. We were the most armed country on the planet, and they lived in tunnels for years as they went back and forth trying to defeat these foreign invaders. It was amazing. First,
it was the French, and that was forever.
Yeah.
And then they left because they couldn't make any headway because these guys really knew it. It was a jungle. They knew their territory, and they were
their territory. It was their home.
They were fiercely independent. They did not take kindly to regimes ruling over them.
Right. They don't. Most peoples actually don't take kindly to someone coming in and invading their home and killing their family members, civilians, just as we wouldn't. When we went into Iraq back in 2003, I would say to people, how would you feel if suddenly there was some foreign army coming down your street? What would you do? Because people would say, they're putting those IEDs and blowing up our troops. Yeah, and that was horrible. But that's what you do to the invading force. And I think the Americans didn't understand the Vietnamese, didn't understand the country they were in. It was just
they didn't want to understand it either. It was just going to be brute force and get out and win. They thought that they could just do this and bomb the heck out of everybody, right? You bomb their way to victory.
Bomb them, napalm them.
Oh my goodness. It's just, and that was our childhood.
Yes, that was our childhood. And so April 30th, he invades.
Yes.
And or announces the invasion. He had already sort of secretly been doing it, as you said. And immediately the next day, protests erupt on hundreds of campuses all over the country, including Kent State in Kent, Ohio. Kent, Ohio is in the eastern middle of the state, over toward the Pennsylvania border. If you just kind of get a bead in your head, if you know where Cleveland is, go down south from that, a little south of Akron, right? Do I have that right? I think that's right.
Yes.
And there's Kent, Ohio, and Kent State was a public university. And why did Allison decide? Why did she want to go there? She's in she's in suburban DC in Maryland, going to a cool hippie school, and why Kent, Ohio? And I don't mean to sound like I'm dripping with any kind of attitude about Ohio being from Michigan, but I'm just saying that generally, well, I'll just leave it at that. But why Kent State? Why did she decide to go there?
It's an odd story. When we were kids, we were growing up in Cleveland. We were both born in Cleveland. And our parents would take drives on Sundays. We would go looking for Amish people. We would look for homes that looked like they were Amish. You could tell by the way that their curtains were.
Yes.
I've always been interested in the cultural stuff. So I was always, oh, how cool, And the countryside around Cleveland is real pretty. It's flat but rolling and
yes,
lovely, and
it's the rolling hills that are going to lead up to the Allegheny Mountains once you get into Pennsylvania, and it's on Lake Erie.
But we would go south, and we often ended up at Kent, and we would go to the Robin Hood restaurant there. And it was like what our family treat was on Sunday. We often ended up there. And Allison fell in love with the campus and the lilacs in the spring. And my parents were so delighted because it was a state school,
Right.
and it wasn't even academically very good school. That's the weird part. And so she wanted to go. She wanted to go as far back as I can remember. So that says to me, as a spiritual being, that Allison has a role in history that was meant to be. She knew who she was and what she came here for from birth.
Yeah. When the protest started there on May 1st and went into May 2nd and then May 3rd and then May 4th. Now, you said you had taken the train there.
Oh, yeah. I had been there the weekend before. No. Weekend before. It was after the 23rd. And I think that year it was like the 25th, 26th on the weekend. And so I was there only on the weekend because I had to go to school, And my parents, when they came to, pick her up, we had dinner together, and it was the last time we saw her. And it was celebrating her birthday. She turned 19,
Right.
It was a beautiful time. Really one of the few, we're all getting along, let's be happy together, family events, because there was a lot of strife about the war at our house.
In what way?
Well, my father was, he had voted for Johnson. My parents had. They always voted the same, and they had a united front.
Yeah.
And they thought that the war in Vietnam wasn't so bad. What's the problem? And there was a generation gap in our family at the dinner table. Allison and I were anti-establishment, and we were more flower power and peace and all that. And my parents were like, get a clue, stop this hippie stuff and this war stuff. And there were real big battles at the dinner table, and that was going across America.
But your parents now, are they still with us? Either of them? Is that?
My father passed away in 1988.
Oh, wow.
This kind of got him, along with, I think, the glycophates, whatever, the Roundup. I think he had that problem of being exposed to
poison. Yeah. And what about your mother?
My mother passed away just a few years ago. She made it to 90. And but it never healed wound, And
I remember seeing your father on the news for years after the killings. If I'm correct, I mean, I think he, I don't know if it was he or if it was Jeffrey Miller's father, but some of the parents and
no, that was my father.
That was your father. Okay, took this to court.
Oh yeah.
And your dad would not let up that the truth was to be told. And I remember him fighting this to fight this, and I remember thinking as a young adult at that point, I hope he's okay, because this it really did look like it took its toll on him.
Yeah,
And the fact that your mother lived to 90 to just a few years ago. To carry that, I guess anybody who's lost a child, there's really no full way to get through that, is there?
Yeah, I don't know about that. I got to tell you, I've dealt with that, and it's going to sound odd, but it was real painful losing my sister, and there's been this thing about the parents, like and I understand it comes from them, it comes through them, the child, it's their issue. I totally get that, but. I mean, Alice was part of our family, and everyone loved her, and everyone missed her. Everyone lost a very important human being. And my parents never knew how to grieve. We're not taught how to grieve as a culture. And I made it my business to learn how to do that because I knew that this was bigger than me. And that it was going to be a really unhappy life if I didn't come to terms with these things.
Wow.
But they didn't. They didn't come to terms, and so it was a lot of bitterness and a lot of just not having the ability to enjoy a peaceful or a loving life because of that. These kind of things affect us on an individual and collective basis, and it's about wounds that never heal.
I'm sorry to hear that. I'm doubly sorry now when I think of that.
Well, my father decided to take it to the courts, and he thought that would be the healing, and he wanted to show the young people how the court system worked and, how it was the right way to go. And so the day after the killings, the massacre, he went to the backyard, and he had all the national press there, and he got in front of all the national cameras, and he said, "My daughter did not die in vain," and he wants something done, and he broke down in front of all the cameras. You remember that? You saw it, right?
Yes, I did. Yes, I have a very vivid image of him. I can almost actually see him standing there. If I'm correct, the hats that men wore in those days. Most men, even from the working class, tried to dress, as nice as they could, especially if they were having to go to court or whatever. But
this was his most important work of his life.
Yeah.
He was going to get dressed for it. You bet.
What did he do for a living?
He was a manager, upper to middle manager at Westinghouse Electric. He had a really good career. He was a fixer. He helped. That's why we moved around a lot. He would be called in to go work at a plant and make it work better. He had a lot of respect from everybody, and he knew the CEO of Westinghouse and would work on. In the end, they really did treat him right. But basically, when Allison got killed, the Nixon administration and all their friends, actually, it was the Ford Foundation, wanted to bribe my father to get him to drop the lawsuits. They said, "Would you like $1 million? What is it going to take, Mr. Krause? $1 million too? What would you like?" And he said, "I'm not interested in money. I'm not dropping my cases. Not interested." But he said, "Where would you get that kind of money?" And they said from what was his name? He had an odd name. From the Ford Foundation, what was it?
Is this from the Ford family or?
No, the Ford Foundation was the largest philanthropy organization in America. It probably still is. And this was, I wish I could remember the name.
What was their interest in it, though? Why did they want him to drop the lawsuit? Why did
they
care?
wanted him to drop the lawsuit because Kent State, the massacre, there was just too many things that exposed that it was government action. And it's plain as the nose on your face. Let's get real. My sister was killed by a government bullet, right?
That's right.
Right?
Yes.
And so the government killed her, right?
Yes, that's correct.
But it's never been about that. Never been allowed to be about that. And the handlers of the Kent State massacre and how this was fed to the press and how it was handled in courts. It's never been allowed to be addressed that it was the government killing a protester and civilians that were unarmed. Utterly,
yeah.
And this was target assassination. I learned at the United Nations when we took it in 2014. This was a firing squad that my sister faced. But what was odd about it was when the guard were marching up the hill, they were all marching up to the top. It was the highest point on campus. They all turned in unison and they all shot in unison. And as my mother said about that, my dearly departed mother, did they all have the same thought at the same time? How does that happen, And then in 2010, the commands to fire showed up from a forensic study, and it shows unequivocally there were orders to fire. And it was always that there were orders to fire. How do you do that, anyhow? So that's where we're at with this. They did it. They don't want anyone looking at it from that perspective.
To this day, right? To this day.
And it won't be tried in a court based on that. Absolutely not. There's no laws when a government kills. There's no repercussion. And on top of it, and they have treated us with indignation. And they've been covered with total impunity as they've done this over the last 50 years. I mean, who are we to want to have accountability and truth at Kent State? Who do we think we are? And because we have fought for that for 50 years, let's have some accounting on this. Let's see who did this. Let's hold those people accountable. Simple questions for people that have been hurt like us. We have become the target. We are the ones that are tracked down. It has been 50 years of the government up my you-know-what.
But that day, if we can go back to May 4th of 1970, so can you walk us through what, in her final hour, how did she, what was going on that she happened to be there? What was she doing? And what if it's not too painful, if you could just tell us what transpired that led to a government bullet finding its way to her?
It's not too painful. I'm used to it. It's 50 years. Allison, like I said, had been a protester. She had been radicalized. But she was like a thoughtful, curious person. Just because she was anti-war and radicalized did not mean that she was thoughtless or without conviction. She had very strong convictions. And she didn't want them on campus. The day before her slaughter on May 4, she was cavorting with some kids on the Commons, and fellow. It was a commuter school at Kent State, so on the weekends, most of the campus went home, or they weren't staying there in the dorms. It was a commuter campus, and so she was living there, and so on Sunday, May 3rd, just like this year, she was on campus with her boyfriend Barry Levine. And they were walking around on the Commons, and they noticed there were a lot of guards, National Guard soldiers posted all over the place. And they were like guarding. We didn't know what they were guarding, but they were guarding. And one of the guardsmen had a lilac in his rifle barrel. And he was getting some attention and flipping the peace sign. And there was this really nice attitude going on between the National Guard and the soldiers. This guy was young, and and he was a student too. I found out that he was a student at the University of Akron, and the students at Kent. And so my sister, pushed to the front. She was a tall gal. She was attractive, and vivacious, and she was very curious about this. And so she's up there, and up walks the officer and commanding, the guy that's his boss, and he puts his arm around the lowly, frightened guardsman soldier, and I said, "What are you doing with the flower in your rifle? And is that how you're going to do target practice this week with a flower in your rifle?" And those kind of intimidation questions. And everyone is kind of watching, and he makes the soldier take the flower out of the rifle, and he's getting ready to take it, the officer, and my sister intercedes and grabs the flower and says, "What's the matter with peace? Flowers are better than bullets." And flowers are better than bullets are on her gravestone.
Oh, wow.
She said that less than 24 hours before her slaughter, before her target assassination, as I learned at the United Nations. And it's an irony in so many ways. Here it was a government bullet. We would have liked flowers, but it was a government bullet that killed her. And she had been talking about how much better it is, how much better they are. And this is really woven into the Kent State story. But Kent State University they don't want to tell this story. And I don't think our U.S. government wants to tell this story because it doesn't make them look too good, And so you're not going to really learn this story except from me, because it's got to be erased from the collective consciousness by our government masters.
So you've worked on this Truth Tribunal for years.
Emily Kunstler and I founded the Truth Tribunal at the 40th anniversary 10 years ago. We filmed original participants and witnesses of the Kent State Massacre over 4 days in Kent. And then we went on to do 2 more tribunals, one in San Francisco and one in New York. I got to say, Michael, you really helped us out with them. Michael broadcast all the testimonials on his front page throughout our testimonials, and he actually helped us get going. And was a very firm believer in our work. We couldn't have done it without you, Michael.
Well, it was my responsibility. As I said at the beginning of this podcast, this was a singular event in terms of how it affected me, what I decided to do. Weeks after that, I started plotting my escape for when my draft notice would come, of how I was going to get into Canada. And we were just 60 miles from the border. By the time I was a senior, some friends and I, we actually went over there to see if we could actually take a boat, like a fishing boat, a little boat, and get across the St. Clair River, which is like it's just a small river, quarter-mile river, half a mile into Canada, because we were not going to go to Vietnam. And
did you make it across the river?
Yes, it's actually kind of a funny story. I tell it I wrote a book of short stories about 10 years ago. They're actually incidents of my life, but I wrote them as short stories, but they're all nonfiction. And the book is called Here Comes Trouble. And so this was one of the stories of our kind of Keystone Cops attempt to figure out how we would escape the United States, get into Canada, and somehow plead with the Canadians to take us in and don't send us back to kill Vietnamese. But as it turned out, as you mentioned earlier, by that time there was a draft. The draft was a lottery. And on this particular day every year, a lot of people tuned into this show. It was on public television. The bingo balls would come up out of that machine with dates, with birth dates. And
who thinks of these things? Who thinks of these things?
Yeah, exactly. And my birth date that year in the lottery, I was number, I think, 275 or something like that.
Oh, fantastic!
So by that time of the war, I mean, they were only taking the top 60 or 70 birth dates, and so I didn't have to move to Canada.
You didn't have to worry so much.
I don't know about that. I still worried. I still worried a lot about a lot of things, but it was. I knew certain things right then on that day on May 4th. By the end of the day, and drawing those crosses, and as I said, the occasional Star of David. By the way, it's something I've always wanted to ask somebody that was involved with this tragic, awful incident. Now,
well, it was a domestic battle of the Vietnam War, in my view.
It was. Yes, and these were casualties of Vietnam. I've always looked at it that way. But as I was doing some research for this today, actually, and I knew that you and Allison were Jewish, but it turns out that 3 of the 4 who were shot and killed by the National Guard that day were Jewish. 3 of the 4. I mean,
well, I think back then, the Jewish voice was a more of a voice of dissent.
Yes.
But there was also the Holocaust fear too, so it's kind of complicated. A lot of the kids, a lot of the kids in my generation, our generation, were Holocaust kid survivors.
Right.
I don't know if I said that right, but you know what I mean.
They were children of survivors.
Right.
And either way, it's fine, according to Webster's. But 1970, just to put this into perspective, this is only 25 years after the end of World War II, after the end of the Holocaust.
Right.
There's not a lot of time between 1945 and 1970. So
and so it's 75 years now.
And now it's 75 years. So there wasn't anything special about Kent State being a school that the Jewish kids wanted to go to.
Oh, yeah. There were a lot. There was a large Jewish community in Cleveland, and we were part of that.
Okay,
and it was a middle American campus. It was an inexpensive place to go to school. It was not your first choice usually, unless you came from a very disadvantaged family where you didn't have many choices. It was more a backup school for most kids. But Allison wanted to go to the honors program. She had decided she wanted to do it. She only applied there. We learned that she was transferring, though. She wasn't happy there. She felt like it was just a lot of, it was a commuter school with people that were not as evolved as she had been running with in Maryland. And in the D.C. area. So she was transferring to Buffalo, SUNY at Buffalo.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And Barry and her were going there. And it was going to be a state school for him and not for her. But it didn't matter. She just wanted to go with him. And they wanted to get out of there. Because there wasn't a real political voice. It wasn't very evolved in that regard. And it was also, from what I've been able to ascertain, it was like the military complex state school in Ohio. Mm. And so they were doing all this liquid crystal stuff, and they still do. And now they have liquid crystal pavilions. I mean, it's like, big time military stuff. So it's always been an arm of the military and the CIA. And in fact, I learned through all this research that since at least 1959, Kent State was a CIA recruiting school.
Hmm. So in May, early May, mid-May of 1970, she's a sophomore.
No, she's a freshman.
She's a freshman, but there's only a few weeks of school left. So
right.
Her and her boyfriend had already decided to transfer to
yes.
SUNY Buffalo. Mm-hmm. Which is a state university.
And she had work that she had arranged for school. She was going to be teaching at some camp or something. She had already arranged stuff. Yeah.
Oh, jeez. Wow.
And and I'll tell you, she was something. She was really, really, a human being of very good quality. It's kind of hard to, I'm her sister and all that, but others agree with me. She just had this other essence, and I think she had a bit of a faded essence. And I also believe that she was willing to give up her life for the cause of peace. I really do believe that. I think that she knew what she was facing. She was a smart girl. And I think that she understood that for her to lay down her life, if they came to that, was worth it.
Yeah, it's, I think any true change for the good that does take place in our world is initiated by people who can answer that question clearly to themselves. What would you be willing to die for? So when you think about what is that thing, and I think most people would answer, well, of course, they would die to protect their child or their parents or family or maybe friends, maybe. But what would you be willing to die for? And I've thought about that a lot. I've thought about it a lot lately, actually. In these last.
Well, I think COVID has brought that to us. Yeah, it's our mortality, right?
It's forced a lot of self-reflection, and I have altered that question that I've asked myself for a large chunk of my life. What would I be willing to die for? And sitting here and having this quiet and time to think and time to imagine a better world if and when we get out of this. I've altered the question to, what would I be willing to live for? So you mentioned just before we went on that you're out in California.
Mm-hmm.
So
I'm here at the Allison Center for Peace. And we're going to get on with our peace because they're never going to give it to us. It's for us to create. That's how it happens. Peace doesn't just, show up. No. It has to be fought for. It has to be, it's a lifelong thing. I remember when I was a kid, I wanted to live in peace. I wanted clean air. I wanted the earth protected. I wanted to have creativity in my life. I saw a bright future. I thought that it was possible for us to live in peace and to help each other instead of, and to live in a life where people help each other and come together and care about each other. That was what we were dreaming about when we were young, right, Michael?
Right. Yes. No. And I think that we believed that we were going to create this better world. And it would be a cleaner world. It would be a healthier world. We would treat each other as we would want ourselves to be treated.
And there were a ton of us that all thought that. Woodstock and beyond, Woodstock Nation.
So what happened?
They shot at us.
Right. And then
and people started realizing, hey, it could have been me. Any one of us could have been me. And so you start making decisions. Do you want, the Back to Land movement happened. People thought there was a revolution that happened and went underground. And then they came up later and they found out, hey, it was just life as usual. No, not even dropping a beat, And it's because they have control of the narrative. They made Kent State into what they wanted it to be. Mm. It was an unfortunate incident. Mm. Those students shouldn't have been there anyhow,
Right.
Those kids deserved it. They don't say it. But they don't say that that's wrong either.
Nixon and the governor of Ohio, Governor Rhodes, I think they basically did say that.
Yes, they did.
And
Nixon called my sister a bum while she was still breathing, blowing up campuses. And Governor Rhodes called the students worse than brown shirts from the Hitler, from the Nazi regime. I mean, my goodness. I mean, it's like they were inciting. They had an agenda. This was to show the world that those kids deserve to get it and to send a chilling effect to everybody. Right. That if you protest, you're taking your life in your hands and your life is going to be over. it worked.
Yeah, it did work. A lot of people were afraid.
People had post-traumatic stress from it. Post-traumatic stress, it has an effect on the culture and the collective. Group of people with wounded psyches become unempowered people. They can't make clear decisions. They get trapped in their thoughts. We all know people that have these issues going on with post-traumatic stress, right? Don't we?
Absolutely.
And then the government does this generationally. We have 9/11. We have all kinds of events. COVID is now the new one, and who knows what they'll do with this and concoct it into some sort of, story where, it creates, people living in fear and afraid to live a life. And that's what we were just talking about. It makes it so you never live your life.
Right. Or you can choose the other path, right?
Well, I think that you got to really work to get rid of post-traumatic stress. I started at 20. My sister died when I was 15. Started at 20, and I really didn't find anything to help until 8.5 years ago or so, with EMDR, which is eye movement deprogramming and reprocessing. It's a post-traumatic stress therapy that is miraculous, and it works. And it worked like a charm on me. And I managed to get my neural pathways connected again, and I don't get triggered every minute.
Yeah, I have a couple of friends who've gone through that, and they swear by it. It's say the letters again. It's EMDR, right?
R, right? Eye movement,
it's
deprogramming and reprocessing, It doesn't seem to make sense how it works, but that's no matter. It works. It doesn't work for everybody, but if it works for you, it worked for me the first time I went, and I went for 3.5 years because I had such severe problems with all this. And every session I had built on the next. There was no loss. It's just like I just got better and healthier and more connected. And when I met you back 10 years ago, I was in the worst post-traumatic hell I was ever in. It was, I had some bad things happen, and it re-sparked my Kent State wound. And that's what got me to pick up the baton to form the Kent State Truth Tribunal with Emily Kunstler. It was because of pain I needed to heal. And it really was very, inspiring. And Kent State is, the Truth Tribunal has been a healing vehicle. And that's what I want my work to be. Our work is, let's heal these wounds. Let's get on with our living and life. And let's get beyond this imposed war, endless war, and never being allowed to think about peace and integrate peace into our lives. And just this last year, I came up with, what would Allison do now? And it's a new way to approach the world instead of worrying and fussing and, making it about money and power or whatever. You could actually, solve our problems with, what would Allison do now? And I think it could change the world.
I just want to say it's been very good for me to talk to you like this. We haven't spoken in probably a decade or so. We trade emails, and
thank you for listening to us over the last 10 years and caring. I really appreciate it. I feel like we've got a kinship, you and me, and you could be my 1 year older brother if you want to be. I don't have a lot of family, so I'm looking for family. The Kunstlers are my family, and I am very happy about that.
They're wonderful. Yeah.
And Michael Moore, the invitation to be my brother.
The older brother.
My older soul brother, or whatever you want to be.
Yes. Well,
I would welcome that.
Wow. That's thank you. Yes. I have to tell you, I have two sisters, and when you were saying that about Allison before, about the decisions that all of us have to make at some point in our lives, if we're going to stand up, if we're going to be heard, if we're going to fight, we don't get to pick our siblings, as the old cliche goes. But I'm lucky to have two sisters like that, both of them.
Yes, you are.
are very much in that vein. And I'm blessed that they're both alive. And I can't
Yes,
imagine
you are.
what that has been like for you all these years.
Well, here's the deal. When she passed away, like I said, I'm a spiritual being, so I go a little woo woo here. But I asked for a piece of her to come in me, and she agreed because she was shocked that she was dead. And the thing is like we have our energy, we have our life force, and our life force continues after we drop our body. I don't know what happens. I don't know. I mean, I know more now than I did when I was a kid, but back then I just really sensed that Allison could come in me a little bit, and I didn't want to let her go, and she did. And she's been with me my whole life. Now, it's not in the real life, and it's not tangible, and I can't touch her cheek, which I really wish I could. But she's with me. And now 65, here I am 50 years later, and it's hard for me to tell who's who, inside. Mm-hmm. But I got to tell you, when she came with me, I got a lot smarter.
Yeah, I think though, regardless of what your spirituality is, whether you're religious, not religious, agnostic, atheist, whatever, I think I've believed this for some time, that when people pass away, they still live on because they live on in us.
Yes.
And I know that, again, that sounds like a cliche, but I think about those who've gone before me, what I learned from them, what I gleaned from them, and I see glimpses of it every now and then, to the point that even when I'll be watching some Detroit sports game on TV or whatever, and something great happens, or maybe it's the University of Michigan, and I'll actually reach for the phone to call my dad to see if he's watching this right now. And by the time my hand gets to the phone, I realize, what are you doing? He's gone. And then right away,
but he's not gone.
I know right away. I think, no, wait a minute. That's why I was reaching, because he's not gone.
No.
And whatever he gave me and whatever I'm able to do to carry on, I'm doing that with a piece of him and my mom, and also my sisters and all the people I've encountered in my life. Anybody who's moved me in some way, and in the way that I honor your sister and the other three from that day, yes, because yes, of the shock it set me into in that classroom in that afternoon on May 4th. And I really wasn't the same again. And I knew that my government had killed these students. And I knew that my government had, by sending 9 boys from my high school to Vietnam who died, 9. There were many more that went to Vietnam from my high school, but 9 came back in a box. And when the last one came back, I remember I was in the marching band there in high school, and having to play the football games. I just refused to play the national anthem one night.
What did you play?
I just sat. I wouldn't stand up. I got hit. I got stuff thrown on me, and it just made me more determined. I have to be honest. I didn't stand for the national anthem for many years.
Good for you.
After that, I felt like it was my duty as an American to say, no, I'm not part of that America that mm-hmm. goes to kill Vietnamese, that sends people off to die, that goes on college campuses to stop protests, to stifle freedom of speech. And I have to say this, that to this day, I'm a lifelong member of the ACLU.
Yes.
When I lived in Flint, I was the president of the local branch of the ACLU. I will fight tooth and nail anyone who tries to take away one's freedom of expression, prohibit somebody from having a book being published, from having a film being seen. Anytime that happens in my life, it's over for the person who is trying to do the stifling and the censoring and the shutting down of anybody whose voice should be heard. So that's why I sat down. That's why when they kicked me out of the marching band, I think everybody knows the end of that story. But I didn't care, because I was not going to be, even in, by that time, 11th grade or 12th grade, I wasn't going to be a participant in it. And eventually I started to stand at ball games or whatever, because there's just so much warm beer that can be poured down your back. It's like, yeah, but I'll just stand and I'll meditate for a minute and a half here. But listen, Laurel, I've kept you too long. I wanted to thank you for this in this week, the 50th anniversary of Kent State, and to the relatives and friends of the other three. I don't want to leave them out of this.
Right.
Jeffrey Miller, William Schroeder, Sandra Scheuer also lost their lives. Two of them because they were protesting. Two of them because they just wanted to go to class.
Well, they were actually wanting to, they were really interested in what was going on, too. They were very active.
Yes. They were there.
Yeah, they were changing. It was noontime. It was like, go to lunchtime. They made sure that there were targets on that hill. That's how bad it gets.
Wow.
But, basically they succeeded in doing what they're doing. And 50 years later, they're holding their concept of what happened, the government story, very close to their chest. And they won't allow, tributaries of truth to be known. And that's where the problem is. It can't just be their story. It has to be everyone's story. Everyone has a Kent State story, right?
I hope everybody has at least a story of what they've witnessed as citizens in a democracy when the powers that be decide that the resistance must be dealt with. That could be just in your day-to-day job. That could be you trying to form a union where you work. They have to stop you. That could be somebody no longer wanting to having to watch the boss sexually harass women in the office. And then that person goes to the authorities in the office to say this has to stop. And, that doesn't always turn out well for the whistleblower.
Well, I want to thank you for being a person who stands up for what's right, and you've always taken that tact. And it's just who you are, and you're saying you got it when you were in high school as well. And it takes a lot to do that. I know how much it takes. I saw my father do it, and I've had to do it myself. And I admire that in you, Michael.
Well, thank you for saying that, and I admire it in everybody who's listening to this tonight, all of you who've taken a stand, any stand, even just for yourself, where you've just said, I can't take this anymore and I won't take it anymore. This is how we're going to turn things around, my friends. There are more of us than there are of them. We should never really be afraid. We are the many, and they are the few. And thank you, Laurel, for being part of it.
It's been my honor.
Thank you very much.
It's been my honor.
And good luck at the Allison Peace Center there in Mendocino. Thank God for you and doing that work. It's very important. And to all of you who are listening, I will talk to you again here in the next day or so. We'll be back. We've got Roger Waters scheduled to be our guest here, hopefully in the next few days. Jeff Garland, who is on Curb Your Enthusiasm, is going to join us, and so we have some good people coming up. We'll be talking about things political, and we're also going to be talking about our film Planet of the Humans that I executive produced. It's written and directed by Jeff Gibbs. You can watch it for free right now on my YouTube channel. It's a provocative new film that says we may be on the wrong road to saving this planet, and we don't have time to turn around if we don't do that very soon. So check it out. I think we're over 6.5 million people have watched it in just the 2 weeks. So I welcome you to watch the film and let us know what you think, and get the discussion going so we can save this planet that we're on. That's it. That's it for this episode of Rumble. I'm Michael Moore. I've been speaking with Laurel Krause. Let's never forget what happened on May 4th, 1970 in Kent State, Ohio. So long, everybody.